evening, everyone, and good morning to the folks joining us from India. My name is Raju Chamarthi, and I am the provost at the University of Silicanandra, which is a non-profit organization and academic institution offering programs in Indian fine arts and languages. Today, we have 5 departments at University of Silicanandra: Kuchipudi dance, Carnatic music, Bharatanatyam, Sanskrit, and Telugu. And we are offering certificates, diplomas, and masters, in these departments. All the details are on our website, universityofsilicanandra.org. We have an amazing faculty. We are doing a series of webinars during this summer. And in that sequence, we have an amazing topic today from our Department of Kuchipudi. I would like to, before we get started, I would like to recognize the presence of Dr. Pappu Venugopal Rao Garu, who is the chairman of our board of trustees. And, I will hand it over to the head of the department, Kuchipudi dance at University of Silicanandra, Dr. Yashoda Garu. Please take it forward, madam.
Thank you, Raj Garu. Namaskaram. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce to you two of my young and enthusiastic colleagues, Devi Girish and Dr. Katyayani Ganti. They are here before you to talk about body and its various, the different perspectives you can look at it as a dancer. I won't give you too much introduction, and I think we'll wait for them to talk. But then just as a takeoff, Devi for us will talk about the body in the context of the geographic area and gender in connection with dance, among so many other things. While Katyayani will talk about control and the core, how you bring in awareness while performing, the importance of awareness. Over to you, Devi. We'll talk in between again.
Namaskaram to all. Thank you, Yashoda ma'am. Good morning, one and all who have joined from India, and good evening to all who have joined from other time zones. We are extremely thankful to University of Silicanandra for giving us this opportunity without much delay. Dancing better, consciousness, control, and conditioning. We open today's paper with a quote by none other than the ace performer who has explored different dimensions of body, Chandralekha. She says, the body is an integral part of the cosmos and the basic position of most styles of the Indian classical dance. The mandala is the ultimate realization of this relationship. It is a holistic concept integrating the human body with itself, the community and environment, a principle of power, balance, stability of holding the earth, of squaring and circularizing the body. To elaborate, Chandralekha believed that the body is an integral part of the cosmos and the basic position of most styles of Indian classical dance, the mandala, is the ultimate realization of this relationship. She imbues the mandala posture with dynamism and power. She takes the principle of opposed but balanced energies, one reaching down through the pelvis and other reaching up through the spine. While she talks about mandala, she mentioned this posture. We create music and dance with the body and perceive both through it. Dance has an immense body of knowledge in itself, but also requires the physical body to become central to the acquisition of that knowledge, to be the creator of new knowledge as well as performer or presenter of thoughts or ideas. The performer's body is molded by the practice of dance or music, transforming it into a body with specific structure, competence, and consciousness. The concept of body as knowledgeable, let alone as a free agent with its own volition, are important components in my attempt to trace the physicalization of learning dance. Body refers to and denotes many connotations in our cultural, social, geographical, and political lives. It could be a clothed body, it could be a working body, it could be a moving body, and so on. Anyhow, for performers, it is always the performing body that are reminded upon. The body of a performer is thus not any human body, but a cultural body with a particular physical skills and a heightened awareness of corporeality. Many contemporary philosophers argue that the body is primarily a product of language, a representation. It is through language that the body gains meaning. Language organizes the body according to the belief of a particular culture. My training in both Mohiniyattam and Kuchipudi also throws light on the same aspect. The cultural boundary of the geographical origin of the art form has much to offer to that form. The technique of the form is bifurcated according to the cultural geographical variation. However, the body is able to observe both the techniques after repeated practice. In order for this to happen, the whole body needs to be involved. All that the body possesses, the thinking, the feeling, the doing aspects of the body. This means that the holistic body must be present as the vital part of the process of learning in, through, and about dance, as well as the manifold areas of learning. This also denotes that the human body is not a universal concept, but rather a flexible idea, which can be integrated in diverse ways depending on time, place, context, that could be made and unmade. This is when the body is being considered as a state of being.
Thank you so much, Devi. That was interesting. So I was just reminded when you said cultural influences on the body. There was one argument by theater artists who said, when the British brought in the Parsi theater, what we have as Parsi theater, the expression of heroes and heroines across India, north to south, east to west, has become the same expression. You know, sorrow is expressed in the same body language and same. So how is it possible in such a vast country? And also, it's interesting that you say body is not a universal concept, but then emotions are. So how they manifest on each body is different, right? Okay,
Yes.
let's go on to Katya. Katya, so what do you think the body would do now in connection with Kuchipudi itself?
Namaskaram to everyone, and thank you, Devi, for those insights, and thank you, Yashoda ma'am, for bringing me in. I would like to speak more from the perspective of how the universality of how every performer could function, probably. But I will begin from Kuchipudi. A famous quote by Pasumarthi Krishnamurthy Garu, one of the most emotional and one of the hereditary Kuchipudi artists who had a lot of jigam in his art course. Ade takadimi. Prahlada rola cheyali, Hiranyakasipu rola cheyali, Narasimha Swami inkola cheyali. Roughly translated, the same takadimi needs to be done by 3 different characters very differently. So what is it that an artist needs to do to bring in this emotion to another group? How can one ensure that we're bridging the gap between the emotional mental plane, which is dealing with emotion, states, rasas, emotions, bhavas, and states of being, with the physical plane, which is all about postures, positions, rhythm, and movement. In my experience of training, performing, and researching, but mainly watching and observing, I've come across artists that have done this successfully, etching their art in my memory for life. I believe that it is achieved through the one skill that they invest a lot of time and effort to develop, which is consciousness. Before I go deeper into this, I would like to discuss the 4 different levels of consciousness that have been identified by scholars. I've drawn immensely from the work of Richard Shusterman for these insights, and I'm so grateful for the amazingly detailed manner of his research and writing. Please stay with me on this because this part is slightly technical, but I promise after that I will just decode it all. The first level of consciousness is the unconscious kind, where the awareness is very limited and very obscure. We are not even aware that the action is being done. For instance, like shifting to a more comfortable position during sleep. The second level of consciousness is known as primary consciousness. When we know the action is being done, but there's no explicit awareness of the action. It is non-observational, like wiping a tear or just leaning onto a wall or walking in day-to-day life. The third level is explicit consciousness, where there is awareness of what is being done, like being aware of the way one is leaning onto the wall or of the tear being wiped, maybe by someone else or by it being wiped, or walking on a path that is very uneven. Now, the fourth level is reflective consciousness, in which one is not just aware of the action, but is also monitoring the awareness, which is being aware of the awareness. Like when we do our eye makeup, I think we need to be extremely conscious. Now, let's relate these levels of consciousness to dance-related scenarios. At times, watching our own dance videos, we realize we never realized our hand or head was being held a certain way. Which implies that at this point, unconscious consciousness was in play with respect to that position or movement at that time. In Kuchipudi, especially, this happens with this position of, like the arm it has to be straight up in Patakam, but often we find that it finds itself tilting in different ways. When we learn a particular choreography for performance, the n number of times that hopefully one performs it ensures that it becomes habitual. It becomes a part of the muscle memory of the body, as it should. But what I've observed over time is this: when we're performing, we focus mostly on the mudras and the facial expression and what we're doing here. But the footwork often gets relegated to primary consciousness, meaning one allows habit to take over footwork patterns, ensuring it is being done in rhythm. The positions and postures and movements are all being adhered to as per the choreography. Yet there is no explicit awareness operating on the lower half of the body. Sometimes, unfortunately, we also find that the upper half is also relegated to primary consciousness, where it's just the choreography is just being done, it's just being done without being aware that it is being done. So in short, rather than moving with intent, we are only moving with habit. Let's do this one experiment here now. Please indulge me, everyone, that I can see. Just sit with your head straight and eyes closed. Be very calm. There are 2 steps in this experiment. In step 1, you will give the input to your mind. I will now move my head to the right. Say it to yourself, I'll now move my head to the right, and then move your head to the right. Can I just see? Yes. Step 2, you will now tell yourself, I will now move my head to the left, but you move your head to the right. If you notice very clearly, in the second step, there's a teeniest bit of resistance in your head before the head actually goes to the right. So imagine if one small input can make such a difference, focusing all your thought, all your intent towards a certain movement and then executing it. This is when explicit awareness is extended to the entire body, and when a certain dancer develops texture and nuance of movement and ability to capture and retain the audience's attention towards their movement, mostly because their own attention is a constant. This awareness of as much of their bodily presence and movement as possible, technically known as proprioception, is what makes every small part of a movement count. For example, I'll give you another example of actors. In case of seasoned actors, when you're watching a seasoned actor, you're not really looking at their hands or legs or the way they're positioning their body. You're just caught up in the emotion of the whole scene and the character and what is happening in the story. But when we watch amateurish actors, they don't know what to do with their hands. So they end up holding it in very awkward positions. And they're aware that they are holding it in awkward positions. So this ends up drawing our attention to their hands, and we start noticing what is not so right with the whole thing. So basically, I give this example to convey that whatever is within the artist's range of attention comes into the audience's range of attention. To enmesh the emotion on the mental plane that an artist has adapted through choreography with the help with the physical, then the 4th level of consciousness is a useful tool. not just being aware of the movement, but being aware of the awareness of the movement, makes the dancer herself a sort of an observer of the dance that is being done, providing the person watching with not just a visual picture, but prodding their attention to follow the movement through its journey. It also speaks to that human primal instincts where one person looks to a certain direction with intent, those around will be drawn to look in that direction. Other than just drawing attention, the movement itself becomes something that the dancer is engaging with, not just with her body, but with her mind. It's very easy to just do this, but when you are actually looking at the hand and you're flowing with, you're observing your own hand, you know. In short, this is combining proprioception with introception, which is examining or observing one's own mental and physical processes. Maya Krishna Rao, a veteran theatre actor and activist, in the course of her presentation in the Natakala conference, spoke about how in her observation, Kathakali artists are always in awe of their hands and mudras and what they're doing. So basically, whatever they're watching their mudras as much as they're doing them, which brings our attention and to not just their mudras and what's happening, but to their engagement with the mudras. I hope this was not just too technical, and I'll hand it over.
That was very good, Katya. So it raises a few questions for me, just to put it across. And this yoga thing keeps coming back to me, you know. So we have been told of a motif when I was doing my teacher training course in yoga, where the mind has legs, but is blind. So the mind just walks around blindly without any focus. So the consciousness is that person or that entity which has no legs but has vision. There is perception. So the effort for us is to bring the consciousness and put him on the shoulder of the minds, and the consciousness says, okay, you mind, you go here. So when you're talking about the fourth level of being aware of the awareness, it's about how much you train yourself to take charge of yourself completely, and you command your own body and your mind, not just the body. Beautiful. And yes. Now it brings me to this question about rasa. We all have this problem where we say Bharata has not been good to us dancers. He says we cannot get involved. Sorry, that's my train. We cannot get involved in completely lost in our emotion. Probably this was why he says he doesn't talk of detachment. He talks of being completely aware. Very nice, Katya. But then let's go back to dance and let's go to Devi. Devi, how would you talk about, since we spoke about rasa, how would you bring it to the experience of the dancer? And what do you think is dance really?
Okay, ma'am. So right now we'll start with the physical awareness for a dancer. So the physical awareness for a dancer about his or her own body is possible only when a dancer or performs understands his or her own body through experiences, from the innocent, spontaneous dancing to the most complicated choreographies that is imaginable. Thus, the dancing body furthers this discussion to another very important concept of our paper, that is dance. The very basic question, what is dance and why dance? The response to this includes a myriad of viewpoints. However, it is generally concluded as movement of music. In response to movement, let's add to the earlier point that while dance involves movement, not all movement is dance. Movement and other physical requirements are restricted within a structure where the routines and rules dominate to construct a compliant body that learns to remain still and obey instructions. Because dance relies upon the human body for its existence, matters regarding the body become pertinent. Having said this, however, there is a question as to what makes dance different from other forms of movement. Just as in other forms, dance too is said to be expressive of how we feel about things. On the other hand, there are literary resources that argue that unconscious facial gesticulations or movements may not be termed as dance. It is also important to note at this point that dance as a medium of expression is not to be regarded as subjective self-expression, but an objectively created expression. Expression in dance cannot completely stated as self-expression in the sense indulging oneself in expressing emotions or feelings which is artistically rendered recall, it is given shape and form and intentionally communicated to other or to a public or audience. When I enact on stage a particular javali, my expressions and emotions that I display will cater to the patterning of the nature of the protagonist that I enact. I might internalize the character and refer to all the literary sources to bring forth the innateness of the protagonist. However, this does not conclude that the protagonist is me. I might not react the same way the Nayika does in my real life, or my opinion on some issue will not be the same as that of the Nayika. The self-expression here is a conscious effort to bring in the qualities of a particular Nayika on stage through persistent practice. So the emotions and expressions enacted on stage incorporate purposeful manipulation of the dance vocabulary, convention, and practices. There are many instances in the literary sources that state dance mirrors society. And that could be termed as a conscious effort in a performance to contain incidents that would provide the insight of positive and negative connotations of society and communicate it to the humankind. If you see in a larger perspective, the enactment of sensitive issues in site-specific bursts have triggered the general public mode. The physical awareness and energy that a performing body need in these spaces are different. These spaces, I mean to say the site-specific works are done in different sites, and then we have this auditorium performances. So the energy that my body will be having in a site-specific work would be different. While I do it in an auditorium, it would be entirely different. So at the same time, the consciousness and control to contain a performing body in both spaces are same for a performer, because we should be equally, our consciousness and control of our own body is of a level that in both the spaces we have to consciously control our body and our movements according to the space or according to the space in which we are performing. So it could be stated that dance serves as a means of communication, and it is more than any exercise with physical awareness. This physical awareness leads to consciousness of mind, body, and space in dance.
Space is a big discussion by itself. So you spoke about objectivity very well, Devi. So another question that arises here is, are we talking about theater artists or are we talking about dancers too? Because we're talking about mirroring society. So how much of society do we mirror as a solo artist, as a theater artist? A little bit. These are only questions. We don't need answers right now. These are only... Now, since Devi has spoken about space, Katya, on these huge grounds, and today we also perform in malls and roads and everywhere. On this stage, one little person, how do we manage this? And we are resorting to screens being put up, but minus the screens, can we still make the impact?
I don't think we are referring to the screen kind of dancing at all when we talk about all this. We are talking about the dancer doing the dance and everyone else experiencing it along with her. So like we just mentioned, we dance in spaces that stretch far beyond the reach of the natural energy body of the dancer. There's a certain energy that each one of us exudes. And when we're dancing, that slightly, I think it goes beyond, because we're moving constantly and all of that. But I think the 40 by 50 stages that we have and that whole auditorium where few hundreds of people are sitting, how does someone who's like 5.5 feet tall, give or take, move in such a manner that she encompasses the entire space? To tap into the energy contained in the space around and extend one's own energy into that of the space, and to go beyond herself while moving and emoting. These are kind of the happy consequences of dancing with reflective consciousness. This is when rasa becomes manifest in the energy of the space around where the dance is happening. In my experience as like a rasika of dance, and I'm a very choosy but very ardent rasika of dance, one dancer that has mastered this fourth level consciousness is Bijani Satpathy. When she is doing her Odissi, she engages with her entire being in the movement and brings her emotional, mental, physical processes together to form one image in every movement, which is why she appears to loom on the stage no matter how big a space she's given. In fact, in one of the articles written about her Kalpana, I think from New York, I think, they talk about how she's 5'2", and people end up thinking she's probably 5'8" or 5'10" when they only watch her dancing, you know. So for another thing is, other than this, we are, you know, constantly performing diversifying emotions through one evening. We do shoka, we do raudra, we do bhakti, then we do. So how does, and we do it in such a way that we convince those witnessing it of the reality of the emotion. In this moment, if that emotion is not real, then I can, if I'm not convinced, they won't be convinced. People who are watching will not be convinced. So how can a dancer, after having successfully portrayed extreme grief in one piece, go back and re-enter the stage to do one sprightly Tillana? If the dancer allows herself to surrender to the emotion, how can she pull out of it in 1 minute? Which is exactly what I think Bharata spoke about and we misunderstood, but we are slightly trying to understand now. This process again, which is discussed above, where the dancer also becomes a sort of a spectator of the dance, I think that greatly comes to the aid of the dancer to be able to dip into the myriad states of emotion and then jump out of them as quickly as possible, is one of the most important skills a dancer must possess. And being aware of this emotion of that's happening on the mental and emotional plane helps one to do so. I've watched dancers from the side wings a lot of the times when I'm organizing, and they do something absolutely beautiful over there, and we are still caught up in it, but they will come in and be, okay, chalo, give me my napkin, give me my water, give me, you know, they are moving on. So how do they manage to do that? Other than enhancing virtuosity and emotionality of movement, there are numerous other reasons why developing enhanced consciousness would be beneficial for a dancer. With developed proprioception and interoception, quite interesting words, one also develops heightened exteroception. Exteroception is being stimulated by external stimuli. When we're dancing with music, I watch oftentimes it happens that, you know, they just happen to be happening at the same time, but they're not really responding to each other. The music is happening and the dance is happening. Because they started after Tirmanam, they are in sync most of the time. But there's no, the dancer very rarely responds to the music or the music is responding to the dance. This happens very rarely. So with this kind of heightened level of consciousness, we start feeling and being very sensitive to what is happening around. So we're very sensitive to the highs in the music, the lows in the music, the trajectories, what is the word, what does it mean? We become very sensitive to these things. Dance training itself again happens through repetition. Each and every movement needs to be repeated like thousands of times for that movement to become part of the bodily vocabulary for a dancer. Over time, once again though, these there's the danger of the adugus just becoming habitual to the dancer rather than have that sense of excited newness and engaging that we had in the beginning. So we develop unreflective behavior without even realizing it, which hinders experience and performance by leading to many characteristic mistakes in terms of technique. For this unreflective behavior to be corrected, conscious critical observation is very necessary. In short, one must train to be constantly consciously aware of what one is doing, so one knows how to correct oneself in order to be able to do what one ideally wishes to do. So what is the ideal? What am I doing? What is the gap between the two? Unless we keep bridging it, we will develop habits that are not really, that we ourselves won't really be proud of once they are pointed out. This is again a process, a very continuous one through which we can refine our skills and improve upon the craft of expressing through movement. The other side of the coin to consciousness, which is also an ability of the mind and not just the body, is control. Only if one develops one of these skills does one develop the other. An investment in either will enhance the other. Control here is being defined as the ability to exercise command over ourselves in terms of both the body and the mind. There's virtually no way one can control the body without involving the mind. Anyone who's practiced any kind of control or balancing exercises will tell you that it has very little to do with the body, in fact, as it has to do with the mind, much like a tightrope walk.
Very beautifully said, Katya. So it's interesting that you talk about stillness and you talk about, holding and not so much movement, but movement emanating from stillness. Patanjali himself, he's only written a few aphorisms, he wasn't a big author. He only gives 3 aphorisms, and those are only on asana, only on pranayama. Just the sitting position as in Padmasana and pranayama. And it's all about the mind. He doesn't talk, the Hatha Yoga that we do was not told by him. It was Swatmarama who spoke about all those asanas. So how important must that be? And to bring this control and this connection to walk this tightrope, it is the breath which comes in. Breath so much that brings the mind and the body into, in connection with each other and makes it work. Very nice. So Devi, how do you think, since we are talking about the mind, let's talk about the dances of the mind, the activities of the mind. How do we use our mind too in dance?
Yes. So movements can develop in different ways as sonic, visible, tactile, or holistic phenomena, and can trigger and interact with other forms of movement corresponding to them, and at times converging or diverging from them. Dance is generally thought of a visible and tangible bodily movement. Therefore, the human body and its movements are a significant corporate reality is deeply rooted in the cultural, social, and historical context and ecological circumstances surrounding us, which continuously affect and direct our body to make adjustments to them, while our body simultaneously changes. The experiences of music and dance into ones with specific structures, competencies, and consciousness, able to produce and perceive music and dance, habituating particular cultural values and aesthetics. When learning to dance, one acquires a body that can move in a certain way. Each culture and each dance tradition or genre favors and entrains specific kinds of dancing bodies which embody cultural ideas of behavior through dance. Dance expresses our thoughts or views of the world. The origin of the movement, however, comes from something deeper and, in a sense, is taken out of context where the movements might be used for some other purpose. It is the combination of these movements which redefined and oppositely controlled, refined, reshaped, exaggerated, and reused in a completely different way that then becomes significant or central in the overall concept of making dance. So here I would like to take the example of Sarpa Tattvam. This is a dance production in Mohiniyattam genre, choreographed by Dr. Methil Devika. So Sarpa Tattvam elaborate the serpent wisdom, and the performance is highly philosophical in nature. So there is a part where the performer performs on the Kalameluthu. Kalameluthu is something like a pictorial representation of serpents or deities on the floor, which using colored powders. And the patterns are very intricate in nature. Something which can be loosely translated as the muggu that we have. But then here the patterns are very intricate and complex. So while she performs on the kalam, she is supposed to swipe out the pictorial pattern on the floor through her performance. So in one of her interviews, she shared her experience of performing that part as something which was magical. She was in a state of trance, is what she told. However, when we watch the performance, we can see that her body is very much controlled and does not sway away from the technique of Mohiniyattam. In addition, she has a task to complete here. She has to swipe out the pictorial pattern while maintaining the talam or the rhythmic circle, and also she has to be in that structure or the format of the technique Mohiniyattam. So this kind of a controlled and structured command on body and precision of movement is possible only when the body is trained to attain certain kind of control. At the same time, when the body becomes an instrument or facilitator to reproduce certain indigenous culture through dance, its training and training patterns serve as important factors. Some movements of Kuchipudis can be translated as the ones that are evolved and nurtured to collate with the essence of its native culture. The attitude and etiquette of the social life of people reflect in the development, structure, and patterning of such movements. For instance, in Kuchipudi, the Chalakavam Adagu. This Adagu actually resembles the churning of curd in every household. So, however, when we do this Adagu, we have our Aramandi in position. So, we will be doing this Adagu in the Aramandi. Our torso movement. So, when we are moving, this torso goes, and then we have to look at our line, and then we are turning the other side, and then also my head, my eyes, everything is moving from one side to another. So these are the conscious, controlled, and hence stylized patterns that have been added to the normal household movement to transform it into a movement of dance. So in the normal household movement, we are not that much bothered about whether my elbows are up or something. We just do it. So, but when we are transforming it into a form or in a format, in a structured format, these are some of the elements that are added. On the other hand, when we analyze the exercise and technique patterns in Kuchipudi, it could be clearly perceived that the majority of the patterns are designed in such a way that it would accentuate a male performing body. Thus, in Kuchipudi, the control of a performing body is not only a cultural pointer, but also a gender pointer. At the same time, it is also important to note that only the body remains as a gender pointer and not the movements. This is from my own experience that I, being a duo performer, this is something that I have understood from a personal experience, that while we choreograph a movement pattern, my partner, Girish, and I would perform the same movement, but the execution of movement differs. And that difference is very natural because his body is a male performing body and mine being a female performing body. My execution of the same movement would be different, very much different from his execution of that movement. But that is how it gives in a different kind of aesthetics of the same movement. So the movement remains the same and the body differs. I think now Katya would discuss more about the benefits of control.
Yes, but before that, I must tell you that we understand the intricacy of Kalam and that it is not Muggu. I can see the pain in your face when you're comparing it with Muggu. We understand the ritual significance of it too, Devi. Now, when you were talking about, you took the example of Methil Devika, I was just connecting to what Katya said when she said movement becomes a habit. Could it have also been that the movement has become so unconscious or subconscious for her that she could then go into the trance? Is that possible? Is just a question.
Yeah, but then she also had to do the swipe out the pictorial pattern. If it was a normal auditorium thing, yes, it is an habituated movement. Yes. But then, yeah, this was one task that she had to complete.
So there is the awareness still there.
Yes, it's a control of that body that made her do it, being in the technique.
Right, very nice. So I know Katya is very, very particular about control on the body, and let's listen to Katya talk about control of senses also. Yes, Katya.
Yeah, exactly, control of senses, because today when we dance, I don't know if it's happened to any one of you, but it's happened to me a lot, that when something out of the ordinary happens around me, that when someone's getting up and walking, or someone is very happily checking their mobile phone sitting in the front row, you sort of get attached to that visual for that moment, you know. So, but when I notice that I cut everything out and I'm very much in the moment, I control my mind to be in the moment, I'm focusing on the moment, then those things don't matter anymore, which is a great thing, because you don't have to respond to all of the external stimuli that's happening around you, you know. Also, control also helps us realize which muscles we are engaging to do what. Oftentimes when I teach, I find that a movement may look fine, but it's being executed completely with the wrong combination of muscles, especially like Natya Ramba. And sometimes there's a holding in the upper mid back, which is not at all necessary that they do. And when we do the Natya Ramba, it's actually your entire neck and shoulder and back is completely relaxed, and we are just using our triceps, biceps, and forearms to hold it in place. But sometimes I just turn around for a quick moment. I've sometimes noticed that people engage their upper back to do it, you know, or there's a stress in the shoulder wanting to maintain that in place. They unnecessarily stress their shoulder, the muscles around their shoulder, because they want to dance well or something like that. So this hampers greatly the quality of movement, and this greatly hampers how we move with ease. And not just that, but when you do it for a sustained period of time, it results in injuries actually. This I realized when I went to my dentist saying I have TMJ. TMJ is actually a muscular issue that comes in your jaw. And that happens because when we're stressed, without even knowing it, we clench our teeth. So having these unhealthy habits over a period of time, and especially when you're dancing, there is so much more possibility of developing these unhealthy habits over a period of time. We just end up hurting our muscles and the joints, around which they are. But another, again, one of my biggest things I feel about Kuchipudi, in which control really helps, it would really help us a lot, is because what we see is a lot of fast-paced dancing, fast-paced footwork, beginning to end, you know, there's just constant footwork through a whole choreography. But if one wants to sustain a movement, you know, if one wants to hold a movement for a long time, that is when control really helps, control of both the body and the mind. In fact, it is much more difficult to do a slow Vilambakala piece rather than to, you know, quickly finish off the choreography. So the value and the beauty of sustaining a movement and taking pauses and being still, that is being ignored in Kuchipudi as far as I see. And, you know, developing these skills would help us introduce them into our choreography. What happens is, because you know you can't do it, you don't want to use it at all. So if we develop, we train ourselves in such a way that we can do it, we can take that, you know, the slow movement, you know, then we start thinking it and incorporating it into our mind so much that it becomes a part of the choreography. So after having discussed these various ways in which elevated consciousness and all of that and ability of control can really help us and help us dance better, we must discuss how it can be achieved, right? So the key is the body. This is where I find a lot of similarity with yoga and dance. Yashoda ma'am, correct me if I'm wrong. Both begin with the body, but they're aiming at completely something else. The body is only being used as an instrument to go somewhere else. It's just the path, but that is not the be all and end all of it. So how can we do this? One way this will absolutely not happen is just by dancing. You know, just as sports persons don't become professional sports persons by playing their sports for hours on end, dancers won't go beyond their technique by just practicing their dance for hours on end. Dance is a destination, it's not a process. This is one of the biggest misconceptions surrounding dance. And I make it a point to mention this because I've heard innumerable times, especially by Kuchipudi dancers, just do one Margam a day. Do one Jatuswaram and one Tillana and one Tarangam every day and you'll be absolutely fine. It just does not work that way. And I can give like 100 examples for this. Just as a voice, everyone who speaks is not a voice culture artist. You don't develop the voice culture required to be a voice artist. Everyone who writes does not gather the skills of calligraphy. Just that way, just because you learn an art form, it doesn't mean you move in the best possible way. We're just learning the alphabet and the words and the vocabulary and the grammar of the form, but we're not training the body to write them as beautifully as one would want to write them. Okay. Unfortunately, these things which were there in Kuchipudi have been discontinued for whatever reasons. There was a lot of, Baskilu, Kalisamu, Dandasamu, Kuppilu, which were a part of, as we can see in the 1973 documentary, Films Division documentary. All of the exercises that today Odissi dancers practice as traditional exercises were part of that. But somehow we just discontinued them, and that's become, I think, a huge lacuna in the way we engage with the form in recent times.
Absolutely, Katya. Very nice. And yes, in fact, that's what I always say. In this culture, the body is trained and trained and trained till it becomes so good. You are just at that point where you're very energetic, svelte and ready, and then you are told annihilate it. Just leave it and go beyond. It's so frustrating at times. You say, I'm just there. Can I do a little more of this Tilana? But then that's why Abhinaya is taught at the end, because you need so much of physical exercise to get into that kind of stability, holding it and doing Abhinaya. Very nice. And again, the importance of breath cannot be undermined. To achieve all this, again, breath is the connection once again to bring the body and mind together. The demonstration of Natya Rambha that you did is very interesting, Katya, because this is exactly what Jai Senapati says in Nritya Ratnavali, where he says the body, the neck and shoulders have to be relaxed, but the spine has to be straight and hands in place. So in fact, he says, he even adds the line saying, do not stiffen up, do not bring so much pressure into it. It has to be with ease. So that's something we've all lost, for us, Saushtavam means that Saushtavam. I think we need to let it thaw a little bit. Very nice. And Devi, talk to us about Samu. What does this have? What happens with Samu, with this kind of exercise?
Yeah, so it is about the conditioning. So in the conditioning part, I'll be talking about the inner body and the outer body. So to be able to express through the medium of the body requires another form of knowing, a connecting or reconnecting to the body and all its nuances, its inner workings as well as the outer structure, and that is conditioning. This type of bodily experience develops new knowledge in another way, which can be found in dance. As part of the bodily kinesthetic experience, there's a sense of knowing the body from within and outside, both in a concentrated and contemplative manner. The concept of inner body and outer body has a pivotal role in Kuchipudi, as Kuchipudi is an art form that also incorporates impersonation of both male and female. That is, male donning the female role and the female donning the male role. And Kuchipudi is always famous for Stri Vesham. In both ways, the performer projects an unidentified self and body. The performer would be living in an imaginary body and assuming that this could be the pattern the other gender would be following or experiencing. The concept of inner body and outer body in Kuchipudi revolves around the biological body and the performing body. So this both becomes the two different states. The most important variation of expressive gesticulations in all classical art forms make major contributions at this juncture: the Angika, Aharya and Vachika Abhinaya. Primarily, we consider the Angika Abhinaya or the expression through the body. Other than the A's female impersonators that we have seen, the female or male impersonators, other than the A's performers, we can see a little bit of overdo some expressions or perform the movements in a conscious, delicate manner in order to project femininity or vice versa. The whole contrast in this is that the impersonators feel that there is a need to project femininity. The imaginary body of their performance is patterned with some cliche gestures in order to make them appeal real on stage. Since they are in an imaginary body, they need to think, react, and enact as other gender would. So the whole thinking process in itself becomes imaginary because they are thinking from the angle of an opposite gender. Because they would assume that this could be or this might be how a Radha would react and vice versa to perform. It is not necessary that this assumption is always true. During my research days, I was very fortunate to get associated with Kancharam Balagaru. She was one of the prime disciples of Vedantam Lakshminarayana Shastri Garu. She quoted that Shastri Garu was always alert and critical while teaching Abhinaya to his male students because he was against the projection of cliched expressions. He would make sure that his male students enacted the emotions of a Nayika with utmost subtlety and astuteness. So he never allowed his male students to overdo any experience. So when she was discussing about his teaching methodology, this is one thing that she actually accentuated and said that this is how he did that. And he always made it sure that in the class with his male students that, certain expressions are, if they are certain only, they'll bring out the beauty of those expressions. So you don't have to overdo to make those expressions beautiful on stage. So this is the same when we discuss about the Vachika and Aharya Abhinaya. The paradoxical mode of performance through all these elements never gave a natural appeal to the audience. The more effort to look feminine concluded objectifying a female body at many levels. Though the enactment focused to bring forth the emotions and expressions of a woman, the exaggerations to make it feminine made it paradoxical in nature. So it becomes a continuous contestation of inner body and outer body. It is only through a constant, controlled, yet conscious practice that a body could be conditioned to perform as another gender. That is why our ace performers and impersonators and gurus never fail to captivate us with their performances. It is attained through their untiring sadhana, observation, and efforts.
Absolutely. So, Vedantam Lakshminarayan Shastri Garu was a phenomenon by himself. So he brought in the subtlety aspect because he was also dealing with women at the same time. So he knew how much of femininity had to come onto the man. And this thing about Kuchipudi always puts me in awe that we are never ourselves, right? We don't have the luxury of doing even one character where we think, okay, this is me, so let me do this. It is always about either doing the other gender or other Hiranyakashipu or Duryodhana, Dushasana, Draupadi, some Surpanaka, because of the dramatization part of it. And as Katya said, this split-second change of mood, body language, how much training does it take? How much awareness does it take in Kuchipudi? It's not, and it's each song like Tarangam, now we do it in 10 minutes maybe, but the Tarangam goes on for 40 minutes. So how much of yourself, mind, body, and soul are you putting into it in Kuchipudi? Very nice, Devi. Katya, talk to us a little more about how this can be sustained through life.
So this sadhana and effort and observation, today's dancers who do it, we call it conditioning. That's the umbrella term that they use for it. So it could be physical process, mental process, physical leading to mental, mental leading to physical. All these come under this umbrella term of conditioning. So what does condition actually mean? Condition, the word, it is defined as the mode of being a particular person or a thing, which is also interesting because when we talk about characters, it's not just about That is also called condition in a certain way. It's an existing state of health, or a fit or requisite state. And for dancers, it's not enough to do just one kind of training. For instance, like doing 50 Surya Namaskaras every day will only take you to a certain point. If one wants to expand one's vocabulary by moving in new ways or to improve upon the existing vocabulary, then we need to train our bodies in vastly different ways. This is not about looking a certain way. This is about being able to move in every which way that is needed. Conditioning is not about being able to stand on one leg or touching the toe to the back of the head or about leaping 5 feet high. Conditioning is about being able to stand still and yet being able to convey subtext. It's about doing that takadimi in a way in which the entire character is defined in just the way you move. So processes like yoga, animal walks, Kalaripayattu, Pilates, modern dance-based exercises all have their own unique system of training, and each has a different approach to movement. While a process of yoga, like yoga, provides you with the necessary stillness, calmness of mind and then the body, one like Kalari will provide you with the necessary agility, alertness and intent in movement. Pilates and other isolated exercises help strengthen various muscle groups required to perform our very, very demanding postures like Aramandi or even Saushtava, where you have to hold it for that while without making it stiff or uncomfortable for yourself inside. And modern dance-based exercises help one gain polychromatic texture of movement. It's said that every 7 years in body training, you need to try something new so that your body does not get habituated to its own abilities and inabilities. So not every dancer needs to do everything. Just as each of our art is very different and different processes may or may not work for different dancers. The goal is to constantly try new things and throw ourselves into strange paths so that we don't become monotonous. One may try 100 things, but may include in one's daily practice only one of them. The best part is that any of this will help us get to know our bodies better. We start realizing which part of our body we're using when and where our strengths and weaknesses lie. We start getting to know our own spine, back, arms, limbs, our own mind better. Where can we not push ourselves? Where can we push ourselves? Along with this develops a sense of what our body is made of. Basic knowledge of what bones, what muscles, what joints, and what is the range of movement becomes part of our knowledge. And the most best side effect of this kind of conditioning is that you will be able to dance much longer with a much healthier body because you've just one instrument for this whole lifetime.
Thank you very much, Katya. Thank you, Devi, also. Rajgaru, we are done. I think we can open it to...
Thank you very much, Yashoda Garu and Katyayani Garu and Devi Garu. It's a wonderful topic. So many things that, dancers need to keep in mind. It's wonderful. Thank you. So I would like to open this up for questions and comments and reflections. Anything. We have probably another 20 minutes. We could take any number of questions, comments, and then, we have rest of the faculty from the Kuchipudi Dance Department too. Dr. Ramadev Garu, Dr. Anupama Garu, Dr. Sumitra Garu, and so many of them. And Dr. Papu sir, you want to add anything, sir? Any comments from you before we open it up for, the rest of the attendees today?
Yeah, it's such a refreshing talk. My God, oh my God. These girls, these youngsters, my God, what can they do? My goodness. I really am so overwhelmed with this because they have exploded the myth that awareness of body in dance is a Western concept. That is not at all true. You see, if you go through in Indian dance, traditionally we are told in Indian dance you cease to exist and only the role that you adorn exists. You are not there. But for an, Indian conditioned mind, this type of webinar and discussion on this is a thought-provoking, very highly out-of-the-box kind of a discussion. If only this is translated into Sanskrit, this will become a metaphysical text on Kuchipudi dance. I mean, so beautiful. It's such a wonderful thing because you see, when Katya started with Katyayani started with the 4 levels of consciousness, I was only thinking that they are not just 4. There are layers and layers of consciousness. There are so many concentric circles. You know, you are aware of the music, you are aware of the rhythm, you are aware of other dancers on the stage, you are aware of you know, your friends or relatives in the audience. You are so much, you know, you are involved. There are 100 things that that go into your mind, but maybe they are subsets of the same set. But you know, if you take into consideration how scientific our tradition has been, you find everything goes back to, uh, you know, Saustavam in the beginning, Katikarna Samayatra, or everything goes back to Chittavritti Nirodha, Yoga Chittavritti Nirodha, or everything goes back to that beautiful verse that we always talk about. Punkhana Punkha Vishekshana Tatparopi, Maulista Kumbha Parirakshana Dinativa, Brahmavalokana Najhat Yogi, Sangeeta Tala Laya Nrutta Vachangatati. You know, that's how at different levels, like a yogi, a dancer is concentrating simultaneously, parallelly, on so many levels. So those things and yato hasta tato drushti, all these things will tell you that, you know, in the tradition itself, these things are all, you know, those traditionalists who think that this is all modern, this has nothing to do, you know, we should not talk about body in dance. We should talk about, you know, grow beyond body in dance and all those things. Filter down again to the body. Filter down how you train your body and your mind and your soul, as rightly put by, you know, all the, you know, I like the way Katyayani dealt with the topic. I like the way Devi has been dealing with the topic, and I like mostly also the way that Yashoda monitored this stuff. It's very nice, very, very nice. And um, in just many levels, if you take this condition, control, and all that, everywhere Bharata talks about, there is no definition of any Angika movement that Bharata says and leaves it to your imagination. He will tell you, bend it this much, put this leg forward, put this leg behind, put this hand like this. So many clarity, you know, so much of clarity has given this scientific dealing with the movement, body movement, and the mind. You know, the Satvika Vinaya, basically, there is no chapter on Satvika. It's very strange that there is no chapter on Satvika Vinaya, not Shastra. I always feel. But you know, when he gives 4 chapters, 5 chapters for Angika Vinaya, 5, 6 chapters for Vachika Vinaya, and 6, 7 chapters for music, why did he not give a chapter for Satvika Vinaya? So, because he always said, Natat Shastram, Natat Shilpam, Nasa Vidya, Nasa Kala, Nasa Yoga, Natat Karma, Natyasmanya. So, everything, you know, is controlled by the maturity of the dancer. As you gain experience, you understand the positioning of your body, controlling of the mind, and how to coordinate body, mind, and soul. This is very beautiful topic, out of the box topic. I'm very, very glad that the youngsters have taken a very thought-provoking, wonderful topic. I'm very, very inspired. I've become emotional while listening to this talk. So good. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Anybody has any questions, please unmute yourself. Questions, comments, anything is fine.
Very good morning and thank you so much, Kuchipudi department team. It was such a wonderful way to start the day today. Certain observations and reflections, just wanted to get that ratified by the speakers. Devi, you very wonderfully spoke about the mandala formation and how the geometric, typically like a rhombus, which we are practicing, helps us with the foot movement to connect with the energy of the grossest form, the earth. And that takes you stage by stage to experience the subtlest within you. Now, Katyayani ji, what also struck me was this consciousness levels, the 4 levels that you spoke about. I was able to connect to that of the first level being the sound resonance. And from that, it becomes a thought. And the thought becomes a kind of a whisper within you. And the whisper becomes a spoken word. And the word that is also dance, like the language, whether it's a dialogue or a dance. So these 4 levels, as per our text, also connects with the Parapashanti Madhyama and the Vaikhari level, where you're able to finally bring it out. And for the dancer, it happens in a fraction of a second. If it's only going to be on the outer level, the people will never get connected to the Sattvika Bhavas. So all the time you're connecting to that transcendental level, and then the Vachika within you, the dialogue within you emerges out when you bring in through the language, the vocabulary of your dance, as per your training, your discipline. So a great deal of concentration has to go in when you are bringing out these very, very deep concepts. And finally, to Yashoda Garu, would you also agree that when you said that there is no detachment per se that is spoken about, would you think about something like Nirveda, which is the very first of the 33 Sanchari Bhavas?
Yes.
Which also means disillusionment. So isn't that the turning point for the final awareness, that you are, I am, aham idam, that kind of a feeling comes because of the turning point of the disillusionment from the world boundaries, rather. I mean, I'm just thinking
Yes,
of that because I've read about it also in Shantanubhava, how Nirveda is the, Bharata perhaps posited it as the first of Sanchari Bhavas in a very auspicious way in between the Sattvika and the Sthayis, to indicate that there is already the presence of the Tattvajnana all the time, taking you to the final Aham Brahmasmi level of Atmajnana. Just wanted to...
So that's the point. I just feel the term detachment is a very loose translation, and it doesn't really sum up the whole idea, as you said, Padmaja. Absolutely. And what you said about Nirveda is what makes the dancer shift from character to character, not getting entangled with her own self. So the disentanglement with self comes because of this kind of looking outside, being there for the whole universe and being there in the whole universe and not cocooned within your own self, right?
Sure.
So, yes, absolutely. I think Nirveda, suddenly after you spoke, Nirveda has become a beautiful word for me again. Right? Thank you, Padmaja.
Thank you, Padmaja Garu. By the way, Padmaja Garu is one of our faculty members from Department of Bharatanatyam. Thank you, Padmaja Garu, for joining today. Any more questions?
Tomorrow we are having our first webinar together. So
yes,
hopefully we'll have a good house. Yes.
Yes.
We'll all be there.
We are looking forward to it.
Yeah, very well done, Katya and Devi. Kudos to trio. So Yashoda, can you also just think of the 4 stages of sleep when we talk about Jagrat, Swapna, Shushupta and Turiya, to all the 4 stages what Katya spoke about?
Absolutely. So
yeah, the one where we are talking about the spiritual consciousness, when we really talk about the soul, joining the higher consciousness.
Yeah.
Can you just add on that?
I just want to say to Sumi and to everybody else that all the Sanskritized and the esoteric knowledge this is just a little bit that has been taken from there and communicated in a language that is reachable to the younger generation. So if I have to get into it, the Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manonmaya kosas, there is so much that goes on there. But then this is specifically for the dancer who is just beginning to dance. for our high school kids, basically, and also for the serious Kuchipudi dancer who has to take on so many roles in life. When I say in life, I mean dance itself is life, right? So many roles in dance and otherwise, let me say. So this is just a toning down of the very, very esoteric concepts that we have in this culture and making them reachable to common man.
Very true.
So,
As Papu sir was mentioning that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, actually, you may continue.
No, it's just we are trying to entice dancers to move towards control and consciousness. Is that right? The topic was completely their idea. There's nothing I did.
Yeah.
Yes, Katya.
Actually,
Katya, you want?
I just want to add one thing. Papu sir was mentioning about all the technical jargon, as you rightly said, translate it into the general language for what common people can understand. In the very first chapter of Natya Shastra, we also talk about the Natya Devatas, the Smriti, Dhruti, Medha, all these 7 Devatas, because we worship all these things in the form of divine deities, right? So the consciousness, the awareness, all these things are the synonyms for Smriti, Dhruti, Medha. So we call them as Natya Devatas. Unless you imbibe those qualities, you can easily translate them through your body language. That's what
Yes. So,
I
as Manoj Kumar said, this is a country where even stones are propitiated. We propitiate
Yes,
every cell. And I think Katya wanted to say something. Katya Devi, I think you should answer.
No, ma'am. So the thing is, when we are looking towards modern concepts of what is consciousness or how they define the body, it's not a negation of what is in our culture and tradition. It's not at all that. We are not negating it. But what happens is, this has happened to me, and at the risk of really angering Papu sir, now I'm going to say this, that when you come in touch with all these all these concepts that are written in a language that you don't really connect with right now, because unfortunately we are Sanskrit is Sanskrit. Well, we learn all our shlokas, we can recite and we dance to compositions in it, but when we want to apply it to our daily practice, there's a huge gap in it for some time. For some time when we're practicing it, that gap appears. So when we actually learn these concepts from another point of view, and then we reapproach Yadohasa Sadodrishti, or we reapproach the Saushthavam, we reapproach these formula, we start engaging with them completely differently. We start understanding the value and the importance in a much more physical, bodily, with that awareness, rather than only, rather than a detached understanding of it being a shlokam that we need to learn or that we need to know of. So it is to bridge that gap, I feel, in today's time and today's world. This other, like how we start appreciating mom's food after we go to the hostel much more. It's to put it down, to bring it down to that level. So it's like once we go through these experiences, we understand these other concepts, then we start relating them. Everything starts making much more sense after we go through that process.
Sorry, go ahead, Katya. I thought you were done. Sorry.
I'm done.
This is more an effort to make it accessible to our students at the university. Because our students, our certificate, diploma and master students come from a different background. So we have weaved back, basically both of them have. I haven't done anything. I've just been blabbering in between. They have weaved and formed this whole system and understanding in such a way that students who are new to these concepts get enticed. Like Katya said, from here we go towards the more esoteric concepts.
Yeah, we are with you, Katya. I highly appreciate. Not that.
No, I'm not thinking you're not with me. I know you are, but just to put it out there that, just because we're looking one place doesn't mean we are ignoring the other.
Yeah.
Highly commendable job. I sincerely appreciate both of you. Kudos.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. We have probably another 5 minutes. If anybody wants to do anything, talk about anything? So Yashoda garu, you have something to say. Go ahead.
I just want to say that essentially in the practical classes, Rajgaru, that take place in the certificate diploma, when I say practical, not just the learning of dance part, but when Yamini teaches the treatises and others, all these concepts that they have spoken about are incorporated into the classes, into the teaching. So, and I have seen, my students have joined these programs, and I have seen how much difference it has made to them, because I could not do all this in my dance class for so many years. But that 6 months of this program, that course that you have done, has brought about so much difference in the way they dance and the way they approach dance itself. So fantastic, whatever is being done by you.
So that's a good point. I just want to share that, to everybody who is on the in this attendance here. So University of Silicanandra has been operating for the last 4.5 years, and we have Kuchipudi Dance Department from the beginning. And the next semester starts from August 16th, the fall 2021, for which, we are currently going through the applications and admissions process. So if anybody is interested, we will strongly recommend that you take advantage of this wonderful faculty and the curriculum. And it's all online. It's very flexible. You can study these courses at your own pace. More details at universityofsilicanandra.org, or if you need to reach out to us, write an email, admissions@universityofsilicanandra.org, and we will get in touch with you to answer your questions, to help you make the right decision about these programs. We can take probably one question or two more questions, or a comment or two. We have another 5 minutes.
Raju
Yeah,
Garu,
so
I would like to just ask
yes.
a question, one small question.
Sure, go ahead, Dr. Malagaru. Yes, she is
Yeah.
our faculty from Carnatic Music Department. Malagaru, go ahead, please.
It was a fantastic presentation. Katyayani Ganti, I've not met you personally, but just seeing you for the first time here. And of course, Devi. It was so beautiful, the presentation. But I have just one question to ask. Somewhere in between, you mentioned that dance is a destination and not a process. I just want you to elaborate on this, because I always thought any form of art was a process of discovering oneself, whether it's music or dance. And all through your life at different stages, the discovery, the unfolding of what it is happening as a process, and it's not a destination, is what I thought. Can you just elaborate on that one sentence you said?
So I was speaking only and specifically within the context of training the body, ma'am. I was not speaking of dance as an art, but the craft of dance. How do you work on the craft of dancing? So once you get there, then yes, it is a process. It's always a process, and there's no end to it. You don't dance to do something. You dance because you dance. That's it. But to dance a certain way, just dancing is not enough. That was the context within which I said that statement. That we just think that dancing is enough to dance well, but it's not. To be able to dance a certain way is the goal of all of this training, and not just of dance training, of a lot of other kinds of training. So we bring all of this, just as we have to train our sensibilities, just as we have to train our expression, our sattvam, just as we have to train all of this, the craft, so with every art there's a lot of craft involved, which can be broken down, which is what teaching is all about. So for this craft, it is not just it's not like you just dance and you'll be fine, because that is I think dancers are doubly it's doubly difficult to do that, because I always say this, for a musician they just have to sit and practice their music, and then practice is their end point. But for dancers, that's not it at all. We have to do so many other things to be able to dance a certain way. So that's the difference.
I agree with you.
So,
Thank you so much,
just
Katya.
to add to that, Mala, I think it's the Kriya Yoga thing where you have the larger goal and then you divide the journey into smaller goals. So dance is one of those smaller goals, and then you keep moving from there to the next goal. So if you want to say each one is a destination by itself, then dance becomes a destination, right? Yeah.
So Devi
Well
and
said,
Katya,
Yashoda. Well said.
Thank you.
Devi and Katya, I think this is an absolutely fantastic webinar. I think I really, really appreciate the work you both have put in. And I think it's very important that in the University of Silicon Andhra, in such webinars, we are opening a international discourse actually on the concepts of dancing. I think that's very important because these discourses, the body and the mind, the body and the text, the mind and the text, the mind, text and rasa, these are very, very important discourses. And I think if we distill, like Yashoda said, we distill these concepts to reach the youngsters. I think these are absolutely essential discourses, fantastic choice of subject, and absolutely brilliant execution. Brilliant. I'm really very, very happy. Like Pappu sir said, I'm overwhelmed by the whole idea. Beautiful.
And I'm very, very happy that, and I'm very proud that you both really proved that young brains, as Katyayani said, in a modern way and in a simpler way, if you tell to this generation children, they will understand in a better way than quoting the sloka and meaning. I really agree with you, Katya, that's why. And so proud of you both, done a fantastic job. Keep the spirits up like this.
Thank you, Ramagaru. So, so the panelists, Devi Garu or Katyayani Garu, if you want to have any closing comments, we can wrap this session up. We are at the end of the session now.
Because Devi said thank you in the beginning, I would like to just end by saying thank you to the dance department for approving this. Or whoever approved, I don't even know who approved, but whoever approved this subject and to include this as part of the series of webinars that we're doing. Thank you, because this is, I think we feel very strongly about this, Devi, both Devi and I, in our own different ways. And thank you for giving us a platform where the best part is that through such things we grow, because when you want to formally speak about something, then you have to do a lot more research into whatever we're speaking about. So thank you for giving us this chance and this platform so we could go through all of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yashoda Garu, anything you wanted to say? You are muted.
Yes, Led Raj Garu. Thank you very much for this once again. And it's been a wonderful experience. We've been talking through this every session. I sat with them. There is so much more that keeps coming. I said, listen, we have to limit it. They are just so full of information and enthusiasm that I was thrilled. We just sat till 12 o'clock last night and they kept talking. I had to stop and say, okay, this much is enough for this session, But thank you very much for putting it. And thank you to the faculty, or my own Kuchipudi faculty, of course, but from the music department who have come here. It gives us so much strength when all of us are here together. Thank you all for attending it too.
Thank you, Yashoda Garu. Thank you, Katyayani Garu, and thank you, Devi Garu. So with that, we conclude today's webinar. Thank you all for joining in. Have a wonderful evening. And for those from India, have a wonderful day. Namaste.